I survived for 10 years in Dwarf Fortress, and it's been a real challenge. This was my first proper fortress, so going from peaceful building of early basics to fending off hordes of goblins and attacks of deadly forgotten beasts, I've got some amazing stories to tell. So sit back, crack open a cold one, and join me on this adventure. Here's how it happened. It all began in the spring of 250. My caravan arrived and pole gear was established, with a team of 7 dwarves ready to start building my fortress. I decided to start by digging next to the river, as it would provide my dwarves with a steady source of water and also make fishing a lot easier. I then built some basic workshops to get started on crafting and manufacturing. Like little worms, my dwarves burrowed into the soft soil, hiding from the scary sun on the surface, slowly expanding the workshop area, and I also set up a pasture for my animals so they wouldn't starve. In late spring, the focus was on digging, specifically for an inn and a kitchen, so that I could have a place for my dwarves to rest and eat. And finally, as spring turned to summer, my blacksmith was able to extract our first iron bars from hematite. A still was built so we could start producing our own drinks. Alcohol, pretty much the most important dwarven commodity. The kitchen was also completed, and my dwarves were able to start cooking meals. I also started digging for bedrooms and offices, so my dwarves would have a place to rest and work. Next, I assigned a manager and a bookkeeper to help keep track of our resources and finances. A trade depot was built and an inn was set up, so we could start welcoming guests to our fortress. Soon new migrants arrived, bringing the population count to 15. It must have been the smell of fresh dwarven beer brewing that brought them here. And as summer was coming to an end, I set my dwarves to dig out a room for a hospital, which would become a very busy area in the years ahead. As autumn arrived, I created the first militia squad, and Itep was appointed as the militia commander. Let's just say he eventually became a legendary fighter who led the first squad until the very end. First caravan arrived, and we assigned Minkut as our broker to handle trade. I also assigned Monker as our first doctor to keep my dwarves patched up. The first trade brought in some much needed food and leather, and soon later 7 new migrants followed. Due to the new hungry mouths, I set the new hens to gather as much fruit outside as possible. Soon after, a stone crafter went into a fey mood, and eventually created a hematite mug, our first artifact that we promptly used for some heavy drinking in the tavern. Throughout the whole autumn, my blacksmiths were busy crafting iron armor and weapons for the first squad. In the late autumn, I assigned 4 dwarves to serve under Iteb. As a precaution, I also started building a wall on the surface around the entrance to serve as barracks for the militia. As winter arrived, tragedy struck. A hunter angered a group of Grey Langers, and our recruits had to kill a number of them. But our bookkeeper, Pedona Steve, was found dead in the hospital, died from injuries from the nasty critters. So I started digging a tomb and Steve was buried. First casualty on pole gear, but far from the last. At this point, I noticed one of the injured recruits was still in the hospital, recovering and was thirsty. Clearly, Monker not taking care of him properly. Everyone knows dwarven beer is the best remedy, but it seemed we needed water. And with the river frozen for the winter, I had to start digging deep until we found caverns. Luckily, there was a body of water just below, so we built a well which left a hole right in the middle of my fortress, but at least the injured dwarf was saved. With spring thaw, the river was no longer frozen and fishing could resume to combine with the fruits we gathered in autumn. However, I was facing a new problem as badgers started attacking my animals, but luckily the floor fungus started to spread after breaking into the caves, so I built a new pasture next to the workshops inside and brought them in for safety. An elven caravan also arrived, and it was my first time actually trading with the elves and not just robbing them as I usually do. And speaking of robbing people, did you know I have a Patreon page where you can support the channel? The link is down below. A loom was also built to take advantage of the silk we could now gather from the caverns, and one of our miners went into a fey mood and made a quern, which was promptly placed into our workshop and never used again. As summer arrived, I focused on expanding our fortress even more. I finally started digging for farming areas so we could grow our own plump helmets and become more self-sufficient. I also set up a temple, assigning no specific deity to worship for now, to give our dwarves a place for spiritual reflection in the harsh times to come, and those harsh times began innocently enough with the arrival of a performance group called the Pure Stakes, which I foolishly allowed to stay in our fortress to provide entertainment for my dwarves. Little did I know how that's gonna turn out. But at least for now, the future seemed bright, and we welcomed the first dwarven child born in Polgir, named Isaku. Autumn brought another dwarven caravan. We traded shell figurines and other small things we made for more instruments and, most importantly, steel weapons. Basically, trash for treasure, the hobo way. Work also began on a dungeon, as I wanted to have a secure place to hold prisoners and protect Polgir. It turned out my timing was impeccable. For a while now, we had issues with chaos interrupting my dwarves, so I set up an archer squad to fight them off. But chaos were just a distraction. I found Deathlord's corpse in his bedroom, learned he had been drained of blood. Our legendary miner was dead, and this meant there was a vampire in Polgir. Instantly, I became suspicious of the Pure Stakes performance group, and Sheriff was assigned to interrogate all the poets, and the work on that dungeon became the main priority suddenly. As winter arrived, I was still dealing with the aftermath of the vampire in my fortress. Through interrogations, I learned that there had been some goblin espionage going on, which made me even more cautious. The traders were still hanging around as well, so I decided to destroy the trade depot in order to get rid of them. They finally left, and we were able to take all the stuff they left behind, which was pretty amazing, although we got most of our trash back. In late winter, disaster struck again. Minkat, another miner, was found drained of blood, adding to the whole vampire mystery. Frantically, I scheduled interrogations with everyone in the fortress to try and find the wild beast and keep my poor dwarves safe. But in reality, I was grasping at straws and had no idea how to actually catch him. As spring arrived, we were still on high alert for the vampire. Looking through all resident dwarves, I became suspicious of Autumn, the dwarven poet, but didn't really act on my suspicions. I wish I did. At this point, the trade depot was rebuilt and an elven caravan arrived, but being on edge from the secret vampire in our midst, I channeled my frustrations in an attack on them, killing them all and taking their goods, which prompted a big migrant wave with more than 20 dwarves arriving, so clearly I did something right. If you want to do something right as well, why don't you click that subscribe button down below? A lion was among the treasures we stole from the elves and promptly trained him for war. And to beef up our defenses even more, I created a new 5-man militia squad and finally started building the roof above the barracks to keep the chaos out. In late spring, it all went south. The vampire struck again and Zacid was found drained of blood. This was the last straw, and I promptly sent every poet from the Pure Stakes into the caves. So first, I expelled Za, the human bard, and killed him, suspecting him as the vampire, but he wasn't the one. So with the safety of Polgir at the stake, I exiled the rest of the performance and fought them. The fight was so vicious, we actually lost our new war lion, but the vampire mystery still remained unsolved, with 6 poet corpses at our feet. Yeah, maybe I did overreact a little bit, but summer was quiet and the vampire did not strike. New migrants arrived, and that prompted the Lazy Company, our crafters guild, to request a guild hall, so I started building it. To furnish the new guild hall, I queued some tetrahedrite for smelting, and soon we were making silver statues. Of course, all the poets had to be buried, so I had to excavate a series of new tombs. The population boost also meant we now had a mayor, and Winged Flames became the one to take the mantle. In late summer, I finally noticed that Autumn, one of the performers we killed, the dwarf that seemed suspicious to me, confessed to one of the vampire murderers. So, he was the vampire that I was looking for all this time! I was relieved, to say the least, to finally solve the mystery and keep my dwarves safe. The vampire was dead and gone, but this was not the last one we had to deal with over the years. In the early autumn, the roof above the barracks was finally completed, and I began building a drawbridge to further protect our fortress. A dwarven caravan arrived and we traded more trash for instruments, steel weapons, leather, and meat. But of course, peace could not last, and a were raccoon appeared in our fortress. Unfortunately, a fisherman was killed and some other dwarves rushed the were raccoon like the smart bastards they were, before the militia squads could reach it. So, it killed a blacksmith and a visitor as well before we were able to finally slay it. Luckily, no one was bitten and infected. Winter brought a small group of goblin snatchers at our doorstep, and we had to chase them away to protect the fortress. A bone carver went into a fey mood soon after and created a bone ring worth around 7,000, which was the most valuable artifact so far. We also started extending the tavern and building a throne room for the mayor. With Tavern's expansion, I added some instruments to the place to improve the cultural life of my dwarves. Just as I thought things were looking up, a human maceman was spotted sneaking around our fortress, and learning that he belonged to an enemy faction called Flag of Rains, we had to kill him. Soon after, a dwarf mercenary Bomrek asked to join us, and I added him to the first militia squad. Every able-bodied soldier dwarf was welcome after the trouble we've been through, and Bomrek proved a valuable fighter in the years to come. In early spring, I assigned Empty Pockets Jack as the tavern keeper in charge of getting everyone as drunk as possible. An honorable position in any dwarf fortress. Another elven caravan arrived, and I would love to know what they thought when they saw the corpses of their previous caravan, but we attacked and killed them before I could ask them.
Are we the baddies?
Soon after, Likot the armorer went to a fey mood and created an iron helmet worth 6,000, which I was very excited about, but completely forgot to actually assign it to any of my fighting dwarves. 21 migrants also arrived, and with that, a metalworking guild was established, and I promptly went to build them a guild hall. With the increased number, I had many jobless dwarves, so I bolstered my fledgling militia squad with 8 more fighting dwarves. That meant a bunch of our livestock had to be butchered to create leather armor, and higher demand for weapons also prompted me to build more metalsmith workshops and smelters. Summer brought more goblin thieves, and Winged Flames the mayor got to test his new warhammer on their skulls. During this time, Chaos were attacking our fortress, and a visiting human necromancer fought them and raised bones of our recently butchered livestock. We chased him away, but had to fight the undead bones he raised. It was an absolute mess, with the whole butcher shop coming alive, but in the end, my dwarves were victorious. In the new barracks we dug out above the caves, I started building an archery range, and soon 11 more migrants arrived, bringing our population to over 100. Summer ended with another human maceman of Flag of Rains being spotted sneaking around, and Winged Flames the mayor put his warhammer to good use again. Autumn brought another dwarven caravan to our gates, and we traded for steel and leather. We also gave them a gift of 1,000 in shell jewelry, just to establish we're not in fact the baddies. To protect pool gear even more, I set up cage traps at the entrance and had to build lots of new bedrooms to accommodate the growing population. Unfortunately, an artifact was seen being stolen at the tavern, and Vost, a human lord consort visiting us, was the one who took it. The captain of the guard beat him up into a pulp and took the item back. Hero was assigned as a dungeon master, and Stag was assigned as hammerer to help deal with crime in the fortress. As autumn turned to winter, a wild force of darkness arrived, and we captured 2 goblin thieves and 1 crossbowman, killing the rest of them in a bloody battle. While that was happening, Godin, a dwarf baron consort visiting us, went on a brawling spree. Stag, our new hammerer, promptly beat him up real bad as a punishment. During this time, Eden the Trapper was found dead, drained of blood, indicating that a new vampire was here, which meant new interrogations, but in the end, those came to nothing. Pulgear was becoming a McDonald's for vampires, it seemed, so I decided to build a trap dungeon for captured enemies. We started bringing the captured goblins to the new dungeon, and 2 thieves died on the traps, but a goblin crossbowman killed a child who brought him in. I don't know who decided that children were ideal workforce to deal with imprisoned goblins, but it certainly wasn't me. We mourned the child, and in his memory, I filled the 3 militia squads fully to 30 fighting dwarves. Perfect timing, because soon after a Cyclops arrived, but he fell to Lloyd the Wrestler, and we were able to reclaim an artifact crossbow worth 12,000. Zethutha the Forgotten Beast also arrived and was attacked by our dogs. Lloyd the Wrestler killed that one as well, and he probably would have killed the goblin that turned into a were-giraffe at our doorstep as well, but the monster actually ran away. Good job, Lloyd. Surprisingly, spring was peaceful. I started digging for a large temple complex where I eventually built 3 proper temples dedicated to the gods worshipped by my dwarves. Soon, 22 new migrants arrived, meaning that the Hall of Headers, a farmers' guild, was established, and we started building a hall for them as well. In late spring, a weaponsmith went into a fey mood and created a pig iron mace worth 6,000, which was a decent addition to our armory. With the arrival of summer, I got a notification that the goblin pits of Hadrax were conquered. A town with population of over 100 souls was now economically linked to Pulgear. A great advancement for our civilization. A wild force of darkness arrived soon after in retaliation, and they encountered a visiting demon called Obok and promptly killed him. I have no idea where the demon came from, but he was friendly, so we had to avenge him. In a bloody battle, my dwarves were eventually victorious. Summer was also the beginning of a short alcohol crisis in Polgir. We had less than 100 drinks in storage, and with our bustling inn and growing population, I knew this to be a big problem. To solve the crisis, I assigned a bunch of new brewers and built multiple new stills. A craft dwarf named Ezum went into a fey mood and he created Milol Akaf, a sheep wool coat worth 17,000. That simple coat remained the most valuable artifact Polgir created for the remainder of our 10-year journey. And a word must have come out because soon a were capybara named Cole came, but Bomrek, the dwarven mercenary, killed it with one stab of a short sword. As autumn arrived, I was still dealing with the alcohol crisis, something that occupied the mind of every dwarf in the fortress. Soon the first incident happened because the dwarves were too sober. When digging the moat in the caverns, the roof collapsed and Shogun, the legendary miner, got seriously injured. Bringing him to the hospital reminded me we never made any soap, so I started up that whole process. The moat was successfully completed soon after, and we started building a drawbridge across it. Feeling a bit more secure from attacks from below now, we started digging deeper in the caverns, and soon after discovered a magma pool. By late autumn, the alcohol crisis was finally stabilized with over 400 drinks in the storage, and that brought 7 new migrants, bringing our population over 150, which meant Polgir was now officially an alcohol metropolis. Winter brought a new wild force of darkness, but we were able to kill them all. The river was frozen, so I had an idea to dig a moat on the surface as well, but I forgot our inn is right below, so as we started digging, rocks collapsed into it, fortunately only hurting some of our dogs. Moat was put on hold as we had to roof the inn again. When that was done, I began digging a new moat. This one a lot more ambitious, but built in a way it avoided the inn. I also started building a bridge across the moat, and when it was complete, I placed copper statues at the bridge entrance as a reminder to any visitors they are now entering the dwarven metropolis of Polgir. With spring, the last of the ice thawed and the moat was fully flooded. Forgotten beast Ushmal arrived, but we were able to kill it with ease, like the pathetic little beastie it was. 25 migrants arrived, bringing the population to over 180. The Hall of Rain, a Rangers Guild, was established and many new bedrooms were assigned to be dug. Summer brought another wild force of darkness, made up of 12 crossbow-wielding goblins, but once again, we were able to kill them all. That was the easy fight. Soon after, a fire-breathing forgotten beast Amug arrived, a punishment for how cocky we've become. I quickly raised the drawbridge, but unfortunately a dog fell in the moat and drowned. The beast burned a human monster hunter and one of our dwarves who was collecting spiderwebs in the caverns. So I covered the well and blocked the stairs, thinking that will keep the beast from being able to fly up. As the beast continued to burn the denizens of the caverns, the only appropriate response was to build more temples. As autumn rolled in, I created another melee squad with 10 dwarves and started digging new barracks for them near the temple complex. Seeing how Polgir was now a proper dwarven metropolis, the Hall of Headers requested its guild hall to be upgraded to a grand guild hall instead, and I agreed and set to work. While furnishing the grand hall, my progress was interrupted when a forgotten beast Lene arrived. Somehow, a group of dwarves and dogs jumped into the water through the stairs above, and they were all caught in the deadly miasma spawned by Lene. You see, I thought the stairs were properly blocked off. I was wrong. Amug the fire beast proceeded to burn 2 dogs that jumped below, and then fought Lene in the water. For a fire beast, that was a really stupid idea, and I was excited when I saw it died of battle wounds soon after, actually taking Lene down as well. The beasts were dead, so I lowered the bridge, fearing what I will find below. But to my surprise, the dwarves that fell down actually survived. But are all very badly injured, and Lene's miasma clung to them, spreading through the hospital. Should I have worried about the deadly vapors spreading all over the place? Nah. I also noticed that many of the fallen dwarves had hundreds of tiny wounds, and they all lost vision, which, let's just say, wasn't perfect as they were all crossbow dwarves, but who needs eyes to shoot a crossbow, right? As winter came in Pool Gear, miasma was spreading through the whole fortress, clinging to the war dogs that fought Lene. To add to that, a wild force of darkness arrived with 20 goblins in total, the biggest we've seen so far. It was a grand battle, but my dwarves were once again victorious. During the battle, Ngabzo, the goblin poet, transformed into a were-zebra in our tavern. He killed 2 poets and 2 dogs before the dwarves returned from the battle and defeated it. Unfortunately, our famous Mayor Wingflames fell in the battle. Soon after, Oleg the Ice became the new mayor, and I decided to use my brains for once and keep him from the front lines from now on. In the bleak midwinter, the first miasma-afflicted dog died, signaling a month of almost daily dog deaths. Yes, we had a lot of war dogs, but in the next couple of months, most of them were gone. To finish the eventful winter, a forgotten beast Disuth arrived. All squads assembled in the caverns this time around and killed it with ease. However, a dwarven baby was found dead of unknown reasons next to his mother. Maybe the child was another victim of the ever-present dog miasma. Alas, winter was not yet done. Another forgotten beast Azok arrived. This time, I raised the drawbridge to avoid its deadly dust, and once again turned to religion, digging even more places for temples. Spring did not start off any better. I found Bamble the Bar dead of unknown reasons. Another mysterious death that was never explained. Continuing the winter trend, another forgotten beast arrived. Thol, the poison-breeding monstrosity. Funny enough, Thol ran into some Ant-Man in the caverns, killing them, but soon after he succumbed to the wounds himself. At some point in mid-spring, the last miasma-afflicted dog finally died, which triggered Mossos the Bone Carver to go into a fey mood, creating a beautiful bone scepter worth 6,000. Soon after, I also noticed that Azok was dead in the deep caverns, but that meant we could once again lower the drawbridge, gaining access to the caves. But that was very short-lived. Forgotten beast Tofi arrived, a fire-breathing monstrosity. I raised the bridge quickly, but as is tradition, not everyone was lucky enough to return to the fortress. A human swordsman was left behind to fight the beast. But that was not all. Another forgotten beast Enna arrived and Tofi killed it with fire. Now everything that happened to this point in Pool Gear I actually streamed on Twitch. And if you so desire, you can watch all 20 and some hours of VODs on my second YouTube channel. The link will be in the description. Continuing into summer, things were not going well. A tree collapsed on a woodcutter and he died. Did I do anything to provide safer work conditions? No. Onwards to another forgotten beast named Ungu, who soon fell to the fires of Tofi. To make matters worse, that human that burned in the caves rose as a ghost and started causing issues. In late summer, a goblin visitor turned into a were capybara in the middle of our inn, biting 2 of our dwarves. But I was so focused on the fight, I never noticed the bites until it was too late. As autumn began, a wild force of darkness arrived again. My dwarves were victorious after a bloody battle, but at great cost. 3 dwarves that I can't call anything but morons jumped into the moat as they charged the goblins across the drawbridge and eventually drowned. A great tragedy, but one that cannot compare to what happened next. Remember how I never noticed 2 dwarves were bitten by the were capybara? Well, they both transformed and attacked my dwarves, killing 1 and biting multiple more, including 1 child. With 6 more infected dwarves on my hand, I had no choice but to kill them in order to contain the spread of infection. It was a sad day. Of course, I couldn't expel the child who was bitten. Luckily, a dwarven caravan arrived just in time to see him transform and they took him down for us. He did manage to kill the merchant and buy the guard, which meant no trade for me. In all that chaos, another forgotten beast, Thepani, arrived, but was promptly taken down by Tofi. At the start of the winter, I began to dig out a new pond on the inside of the river wall, so we could continue fishing in relative safety. Another forgotten beast arrived, falling victim to Tofi again, the fire-breathing beast who had become our first defense line in the caverns. Other than that, winter was peaceful. More tombs were built, and one of the weaponsmiths was taken by a fey mood, creating an iron pike, which ended up being a valuable weapon as we put it to good use in the fortress' future battles. With spring's thaw, the new pond filled in, and the fishing could continue. But that was the last peaceful event of the spring. A wild force of darkness came once again, but we emerged victorious, with some of our dwarves injured in the battle. But that victory was short-lived, as a mountain titan arrived, sparking another battle, and after it, I realized that we had another vampire victim on our hands. In revenge, I sent my squads to kill a human poet. Needless to say, he was not the vampire. As the days passed, 2 more forgotten beasts arrived, but Tofi, our fire-breathing pet, took care of them with ease. But in so many battles with various beasts, Tofi sustained many injuries and was barely able to move anymore. So I sent down my squad, and Asen the Hammer Lord delivered the mercy blow and named his hammer in honor of the victory. Tofi, an enormous skinless fire-breathing gecko with a short horn, a defensive force in our caverns for more than a year, has finally fallen. He'll be remembered as our greatest fear, but also our biggest salvation. May he rest in pieces. The vampire attacked again, and I still had no idea who it was. So, in another crazy attempt to get rid of it, I exiled all the visiting poets to hate drags, the pits that our civilization conquered some time ago. Just as they were leaving, a marsh titan arrived, killing one of the exiled poets. I sent my first squad after it, and Kadol the dwarf killed the titan with a single stab. In the moment of peace we had, I focused on improving our living conditions. I built a couple new clothing workshops, and we started to work on a new silk clothing, but the peace was short-lived, as a forgotten beast named Ugosh arrived. But now, my dwarves were ready for it, and Asmo the Spearmaster killed it with one stab. Autumn began with another fierce battle against the wild force of darkness. Despite the victory, another dwarf drowned in the fight. I decided to dig a ramp out of the water to hopefully prevent any future casualties, and it actually worked most of the time. But the real shock came when another vampire murder occurred. It was revealed that Eden, the recruit, was the vampire responsible for all the kills. As a punishment, he was imprisoned for 225 days and scheduled for a severe beating. Another forgotten beast, Nolthak, arrived soon after. Lidas the spear dwarf quickly killed it after another easy battle. As the autumn turned towards winter and the river began to freeze, I started digging through the ice to recover the corpses of the dwarves drowned in the moat. The winter was a harsh one for Polgir. For the first time, we faced attacks from the cavern-dwelling Ant-Men. Despite the danger, my dwarves were victorious in both battles. A weaver was also taken by a Feymud and ended up creating a pair of pants called Densmore, which ended up being our second most valuable artifact. During the winter months, we also faced 3 forgotten beast attacks, but with the help of our half-naked fighter Vukar, Sion the Spearmaster, and Beam the Marksman, we were able to defeat the beasts. Unfortunately, 2 dwarves were seriously injured in the fights, and one of them ultimately succumbed to their wounds. Of course, spring began with another arrival of a wild force of darkness, but my dwarves were prepared as they defeated the enemy with no casualties. To further protect against goblin attacks, I decided to begin building an archer tower. Just as we completed the archer tower, the fortress was once again attacked by cave dwellers. But despite the deadly attack, our 2 cave militia squads managed to defeat them. In late spring, a marsh titan arrived, causing plenty of chaos. The beast was killed, but at a cost of 3 dwarven lives. In summer, I decided to send out my first squad on a raid to the nearby town of Tixwam. It was my first time I did something like that, and I was nervous to see what's going to happen, but the squad returned with valuable spoils and tales of victory. This was the first squad that was still led by Iteb, our first ever fighting dwarf. In preparation for future battles, I began building ballistas and catapults on the rooftops, but really, I should have built them in the caves, as 2 more forgotten beasts arrived, but they were quickly killed by Rawad the Axe-Lord and Asmel the Spearmaster. As the summer progressed, I sent out the first squad again, this time to raise the goblin town of Trade Contained. The squad returned with treasure, and the population of that town was now down to 20, making it a prime target for future expansion. Falling leaves and cold wind once again brought the threat of the wild force of darkness. The goblins were no match for our elite marks dwarves, but the battle was not without its casualties. As the dust settled and my dwarves tended to the wounded, a dwarven caravan arrived. The dwarven liaison brought with him news of great significance. The colony of Polgir was being raised to the status of barony, and Oleg the Ice was now a baron. But the tranquility was short-lived, as 3 forgotten beasts arrived in mid-autumn. Kadol the Swordmaster, Toon the Axe-Lord, and Gashut fought the beasts, earning their killing blows. In late autumn, 3 groups of cave dwellers arrived. We emerged victorious, and I decided it's past time I began building walls in the caves to protect ourselves from future attacks. But those walls were not built in time. As the bitter winter gripped Polgir, we faced yet another attack. The deadly Ant-Man sprung an ambush, killing multiple dwarves. In response, I sent 2 squads to hunt them down deep into the caverns. But the dangers didn't stop there. a goblin visitor turned into a were-lizard and started wreaking havoc in the tavern. The first squad was quick to respond, killing the beast before it could cause too much damage. In late winter, another forgotten beast arrived, taking down 2 Mark dwarves who stupidly rushed into melee again. Spring signaled our last year in Polgear. A wild force of darkness arrived for the first time with a mix of humans and dwarves in their midst, and the ensuing battle raged for a couple of days. In the end, Polgear was victorious, but at a cost of 2 drowned dwarves. The moat continued to be deadlier than the enemy, and the first squad led by Iteb was sent out on a secret raid to the goblin fortress of Odwells. They soon returned with valuable artifacts. Emboldened by our victory, I sent them out again, this time to demand tribute from the goblins of Steelbewitched. Once again, they returned successful, securing tribute to arrive in the autumn. I sent Iteb and his squad out on 2 more raids, and they secured tributes from the nearby human settlements Ravengeese and Nil Pondered. In summer, a scholar named Mabzuth arrived at the fortress, seeking to study here. Despite my initial skepticism, I allowed him to stay and study. In an effort to secure even more tribute, I sent Iteb and his squad to demand tribute from the nearby human settlement of Leafy Rabbits and the goblin settlement of Field Bandits. The squad returned successful once again. In late summer, another forgotten beast threatened Polgear, but with skilled warriors like Sigon the Spearmaster, we were able to defeat it. Cavern dwellers soon launched another ambush, killing a human monster hunter in the process, so I had to quickly respond with a cavern defense squad, eliminating the threat. The autumn began with an attack by 2 goblin snatchers, but it quickly became clear they were only a distraction as the siege began. The goblin fallen one was leading the attack, raising undead as he went. The necromancer had a lot of undead to raise, but luckily they were weak and the fallen one was eventually killed in battle. Soon after, a cyclops arrived, causing chaos and killing a human and a dwarven child before being taken down. At this point, cavern dwellers were sighted again, and a squad was sent to deal with them. Most of the Endmen were killed, but it was clear that more were hiding in the water and out of the reach. Autumn ended with Moro the blacksmith being found dead and the hospital full, but the cause of death remained unknown. As the winter set in, I began to dig for corpses that had been trapped in the ice again. As my last major project, I began to mine a passage under the frozen river. As the tunnel under the river was completed, a were-lizard arrived and once again my foolish rangers rushed in to fight it. A bard died in the following fight and 2 dwarves were injured, so I had to expel them to Hadrax to prevent the infection from spreading. As winter progressed, more and more cavern dwellers arrived, and we had to engage into a prolonged fight, which we did ultimately win. And unrelated, several dwarves fell into the moat again as the ice was beginning to thaw, adding to the moat casualties. Spring of 260 brought with it the last month of my journey, so I decided to send Iteb and the first squad to capture and hold the goblin town of Trade Contained. Soon after, they sent the good news of their successful conquest. Not content with just one victory, I sent another squad to conquer the town of Troublesin. The mission was a success, and Troublesin was added to the Polgear's list of conquered towns. Feeling the lack of militia squads present in the fortress, the cavern dwellers attacked one last time. But through our determination and skill, my dwarves were victorious once again, and the cavern dwellers were defeated. As the dust settled, the fortress of Polgear could look back on 10 long years of battles, sieges, and forgotten beasts. The fortress has been through a lot, but in the end, it had stood the test of time and proven to be a formidable stronghold. Thank you for watching and following the story of Polgear.